Hey everyone, good to see you again. Thanks to those who attended my webinar the other day. I just wanted to respond to a few of the questions and answers that we didn't get to at the end of the call, and so I'm going to read them and just kind of walk through them. Feel free to contact me at my email if you ever have further questions. It's cooleym@fau.edu, COOLEYM@fau.edu. All right, so the first question that we didn't get to is foster and biological family co-parenting situation not confusing for the child? And actually the child who's in foster care usually has a pretty good idea, depending on their age, level of development, and any other kind of needs about what's going on. They know what's going on. They have a pretty good idea that they're in foster care, that their parents are working through the case plan to work towards reunification. And so for the most part, co-parenting means that their parents are being open and honest. And when I say parents, we'll say both biological parents and foster parents in that situation to help that child feel that they get to go home, that they're going to be returned to their family. Is this always the case? No, of course. There are situations where they might not get to go home or things might be a lot more uncertain. But for the most part, foster parent and biological parent co-parenting is healthier for the child. And I always think it's kind of like divorce. Divorce happens, and a good divorce is better than a bad marriage. There's research to support that. However, good divorces go over best when the parents co-parent and work together. And the same is true for foster families. It's just a really different situation because obviously there's not a divorce there, but very similar. All right. The second question, or what are characteristics and attributes of good foster parent candidates? Well, I think that, a good parent usually the qualities of a good parent are usually pretty consistent. For foster parents, because they're going to be working under the kind of realm of the child welfare system, is just to be really open to some of the uncertainties that often come in with child cases, to be open to working with the biological parents, to be open to working with the foster care system. It doesn't mean not to question things that they don't understand or that might not seem like are the best for the child. However, they really should be open and willing to kind of work with all of these different people and players that come into their life. So it's hard. It sometimes can feel like you're living in a fishbowl. There's caseworkers and guardians ad litem or CASAs coming to your house, but for the most part, if you can just be open to the fact that you have a big system that's coming together to work towards the best interests of this child, that's one of the best attributes. The other is being open to understanding the child's needs for a relationship with their biological family, even if the plan is not for them to be reunified or to go home, to support that child's culture and to just be open and willing to understand that that child has different needs than children who aren't in foster care. And also foster parents who are willing just to, stay child focused, but also to provide a stable home. So that means setting boundaries, with the child, providing rules and structure, because children really do need that rules, or do need the rules, and they do need that structure. And sometimes with the changing of homes, that can get lost kind of easily. What can a foster parent do with a child who is behaving due to negative experiences? There are a good amount of trainings and things like that out there, and they're not all evidence-based, but for the most part, foster parents can first understand the impact of trauma and how trauma can impact a child's ability to cope. That means that they can have impacts on how they think about things, how they deal with problems. It often means that they might have more reactions and behaviors kind of on the outside before they kind of can calm down and self-regulate and deal with the problem. And so being really patient, but also understanding what trauma looks like and what that is. For children, how that impacts their behaviors and their way of thinking about things. And then also to learn about positive discipline strategies and behavioral discipline strategies. So this is not really the best place to go into all of that, but please contact me if you'd like some information about specific types of trainings. That would be good, because it might depend too on the age of your child or how long you've known that child. But in general, evidence-based behavioral parent trainings are the best way to go when you have younger children or middle to high school age children, depending on their age. There's different ones. All right, what if a child lives with their foster family, but the child is getting into a lot of trouble and the foster family is failing to help? What happens to the child? Do they get relocated to a new family? So I think we addressed this just a little bit on the webinar, and a lot of whether a child is moved from a placement depends on what's going on with that placement. So sometimes, a child will be removed if the foster family is not able to meet the needs. However, the goal of the child welfare system is to keep that child as stable as possible. So in most cases, the foster care system is going to try to stabilize the foster care placement first before they just move a child. Those moves create further trauma and can further impact behaviors. And so it's better for that child to stay in that placement as much as they can or as long as they can, unless it's just a very, very bad fit, which is, it happens every once in a while. It's very difficult sometimes to get things right the first time. But for the most part, they try to keep the child there. They try to put supports in place. They might have in-home therapy come. They might have services come to help the foster parent in the home. Most of the time, foster families don't get family therapy. It can happen, and it has happened, but for the most part, usually services are offered to the parents and the child separately. However, or it's offered within the home, or it's something that's provided by the caseworker. But for the most part, you want to try to reduce the moves for the child when possible. How difficult is it for single people to adopt? So it really depends on the place that you're at, the state where you're at, the rules of the agency that you're at. For the most part, if you meet income requirements, housing requirements, like as far as space and location and things like that, and you meet, the safety requirements, it's really not as difficult for a single person to adopt. I would say sometimes there's placements or homes that are single that are better for some children. Maybe a child experienced a lot of domestic violence, for example, between their two caregivers, and they weren't able to go home and be reunified with their parent. So maybe being with a single parent and having that kind of one-on-one attention might help them to kind of recover or get over some of the, not get over, but to recover and heal from some of that trauma. And so it is not that difficult. However, it might just depend on the type of agency rules or regulations in place. There's, some things that are set by the state or on a larger level, but for the most part, practices can differ depending on where you are. And so just ask around if that's you. I'm trying to figure out if you're able to adopt as a single person. Why does foster care have a bad reputation, where some people believe it's better for kids to remain with parents in less optimal conditions and to be placed into foster care? So I think that I mentioned this a little bit earlier on in the talk, but removal from their biological parents' care is a trauma in itself. And there's multiple different aspects of how that trauma can look. One is the actual removal from somebody that you love. Even if you've been through abuse or neglect at the hands of a caregiver or parent, you still love them, you're still deeply attached to them. And a lot of times things like abuse or neglect happen. They're not something that happen kind of ongoing. They're something that follow crisis. There's something that follow job loss. There's something that follows other types of stressors going on. And there's usually a lot of positive moments. There's also, your biological parents are your link to your family, your link to your identity, to who you are. And so it's always better when possible to keep that child connected to their biological parents and family as much as you can. I always say, even if they're adopted, even if they're put into foster care, you still need to maintain that connection between the child and the parents, because, that is the one thing that the child identifies with. There's always situations where the child's going to be really bonded to the foster family. There's even situations where the child might feel pressure to choose one family over the other, but I always say, why do you have to choose? Why can't you have a good relationship with your foster family with the expectation that you're going to go home? Why can't you maintain both of those connections? And so does it always work out like that? No. But is it better to think that, that's why I put out kind of that co-parenting aspect, is it better to think of, the foster and the biological family as working together in the best interest of the child, or even the foster parents and the foster care system? Absolutely. So supporting that child to maintain their connection to their past and hopefully their future as they get to be reunified, while also, like I said, understanding that foster care is intended to be short-term. Foster parents can adopt, and people should be able to adopt when that child needs to be adopted, but the goal really should be to try to keep that child as stable in their biological home as possible, so to prevent foster care. Something to work on in the future, though. All right. Are there going to be more research studies on how the current racial environment and tensions are impacting foster care? Absolutely. I know one of the projects I'm involved in right now is looking at families who are involved in child protection investigations. So families that have been reported for potential abuse or neglect, who are being investigated by the child welfare system. And what they've actually done for this pilot project, so it's a brand new project, is do racial equity coaching with caseworkers. So when they go and they talk with families, they can be more responsive, they can be more appropriate, they can be anti-racist when they're talking with families, especially families of color who are involved in the system. And so that will hopefully engage families and services before the child's removed from their home. And they're seeing some positive results, but we're working on that now. But I think you'll see a lot more of that coming out in the future. So yes. Would you recommend the child then be adopted compared to long-term foster care life? So in most cases, stability and permanency are things that we value for children. And usually that means reunification with their biological family, or it means, or it looks like adoption. There are situations where adoption might not be the best option for children. For example, there might be a situation where, a child is 16, 17, maybe even 18, about to graduate from high school. And they're not really in a situation where they can be adopted because family isn't there to step up and handle that adoption. Friends aren't there to step up and handle that adoption, or a potential adoptive family isn't there. A lot of times adoptive families are looking for children who are a little bit younger. And so in those cases, there are permanent guardianship situations where older children especially, that's where you see it often, can live with family members or friends or things like that, in kind of what we call more of a long-term foster care situation instead of being adopted. So because adoption, that option isn't always there. And sometimes that's better because that means that they can maintain their identity. There are certain resources and supports that they get in being a foster youth who's connected to the system as they graduate high school, that if they were adopted, they wouldn't have access to some of those resources or supports. And so for the most part, adoption and stability are important, but that might not be possible because of the resources or the people not being able to be in that place. So just things to think about. Can you address outcomes of foster children placed in same-race foster families compared to foster parents of other races or different religions, just any outcomes? So there's a lot of research out there, but they're not all on foster families. A lot of the research has been done on children who have been adopted. And so I'm actually working with some of that, what we call secondary data, so data that's already been collected to look at some of these things. And really what you see is that a lot of times children don't have poor outcomes when they're placed in different race families than when they are in same race families. However, that's when you look at things, just looking at numbers and reports of like scales of, adaptation or behaviors or things like that, where we really kind of see the difference with children who have a different race, ethnicity, or culture, religion, for example, from their foster families, is in qualitative reports. And a lot of times, I won't say a lot, but we'll say that there are definitely qualitative studies where there are a number of children who have said that they've experienced racism, or they've experienced discrimination against their religious beliefs, or they haven't been supported in their religious beliefs, by foster parents who don't share that same culture or tradition. It's hard because you're not always able to place a child of the same race or religion or values, for example, with a foster parent who shares those beliefs or values. And sometimes foster families are, they force children to go to their religious services and participate in things that the child might not have been prepared for or comfortable for, especially while the child's already been removed from their biological home and done something really different for the rest of their life prior to that foster care placement. However, in general, they fare pretty well, but sometimes like those pieces, remain, those pieces of remembering that foster family might not value who I am, or that foster parent might not know, how to treat me as a person of a different religion, race, culture, etc. And so I think those are just really important things to think about, if you're thinking about fostering, or if you do know a foster family, is to think that, you are working with a child, but you're working with a child who had a life maybe that was very different from yours prior to coming into your home. And so it's difficult to find that balance. And some foster parents take on children from different families and have a lot more to balance. And I know that it's difficult to please everybody, and you want to get them kind of, in the most family-like situation as possible. So it's not an easy answer, but just to remember that, children might not have worse outcomes behaviorally, like as far as like observing their behaviors. However, they might have different emotional responses if they feel like they're not necessarily taken seriously or respected by their foster parent. All right, well, that's all the questions I have for today. As you know, foster care is, it's a challenge. It's kind of a different situation and it's a different way to parent. But I hope that, you have some more kind of insight or details about some of the intricacies so that you can kind of step in. And I always think that, really just approaching children and trying to understand that what they're going through is real for them, understanding that their reactions are real to them. That's usually what kind of helps me. And also seeing their behaviors as not what's wrong with you, but instead seeing behaviors as what has happened, like if you see something that is concerning or that you're worried about. So getting foster parents ready to handle all of those things, I think, is really important in supporting youth mental health as they go through this time of uncertainty and change. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks.